And Solomon built his house 13 years, and he finished his house. And he built the house of the forest of Lebanon. 100 cubits was its length, 50 cubits its breadth, and 30 cubits its height, on 4 rows of cedar pillars, and cut beams of cedar upon the pillars. And it was covered with cedar above, on the walls, which were on 45 pillars, 15 in each row. There were windows in 3 rows. Each window was opposite the other window 3 times. All the entrances and posts were square. Also the window in each window was opposite the other window 3 times. And he made the porch of pillars, 50 cubits its length, 30 cubits its breadth, and a porch between them, and pillars and thick beams before them. And he made a porch for the throne where he might judge, porch of judgment, and was covered with cedar from one side of the floor to the other. And his house he might dwell was in the other court. Within the porch was of the like work, and the house which he would make for Pharaoh's daughter, whom Solomon had taken as a wife, was like his porch. And these were of precious stones, according to the measure of hewn stones, sawed with saws within and without, from the foundation up the coping, and from the outside until the great court. The foundation was of precious stones, great stones, stones of 10 cubits, and stones of 8 cubits. And above were precious stones, according to the measure of hewn stones and cedars. And the great court round about was of 3 rows of hewn stones, and a row of cut beams of cedar, for the inner court of the house of the Lord, for the porch of the house. King Solomon sent and fetched Hiram out of Tyre. He was a widow's son of the tribe of Naphtali, and his father was a man of Tyre, a coppersmith. He was filled with the wisdom and understanding and skill to work all works in copper, and he came to King Solomon and he wrought all his work. And he cast the 2 pillars of copper. 18 cubits was the height of each pillar, and a line of 12 cubits did encompass it, about and so the other pillar. And he made 2 chapiters to set upon the tops of the pillars of molten copper. 5 cubits was the height of one chapiter. 5 cubits was the height of the other chapiter. Nets of checker work, wreaths of chain work, for the chapiters which were upon the top of the pillars, 7 for one chapiter, 7 for the other chapiter. And he made the pillars in 2 rows round about upon the one network, to cover the chapiters that were upon the top with pomegranates. So he did for the other chapiter. The chapiters that were upon the top of the pillars were of lily work in the porch, 4 cubits. There were chapiters above also upon the 2 pillars, over against the belly which was by the network. And the pomegranates were 200 in rows upon round about upon each chapiter. And he set up the pillars and in the porch of the temple. And he set up the right pillar and called the name thereof Jachin. And he set up the left pillar and he called the name thereof Boaz. And upon the top of the pillars was lily work. So was the work of the pillars finished. And he made the molten sea 10 cubits. From brim to brim it was round all about, and the height thereof was 5 cubits. In a line of 30 cubits it compassed it round about. Under the brim there were knops, compassing it round about for 10 cubits, compassing the sea round about. The knops were cast in 2 rows when it was cast. It stood on 12 oxen, 3 looking toward the north, and 3 looking toward the west, 3 looking toward the south, and 3 looking toward the east. And the sea was set upon them above, and all their hinder parts were inward. And it was a hand breadth thick, and the brim thereof was wrought like the brim of a cup, with flowers of lilies. It contained 2,000 measures. And he made the 10 bases of copper. 4 cubits was the length of one base, and 4 cubits its breadth, and 3 cubits its height. And the work of the bases was in this manner. They had borders, and the borders were between the ledges. And on the borders that were between the ledges were lions, oxen, cherubim. And on the ledges there was a base above, and beneath the lions and oxen were wreaths of thin work. And each base had 4 copper wheels, and tablets of copper, and the 4 corners thereof had undersetters. Under the laver the undersetters were molten. At the side of each were wreaths, and the mouth of it within the chapiter and above was a cubit, and the mouth thereof was round after the work of a base, a cubit and a half, and also upon its mouth were gravings, and their borders were 4 square round, not round. And the 4 wheels were underneath the borders, and the axle trees of the wheels were in the base, and the height of each wheel was a cubit and half a cubit. And the work of the wheels was like the work of a chariot wheel. Their axle trees and their naves and their felloes and their spokes were all molten. And there were 4 undersetters at the 4 corners of each base. The undersetters were of the base itself, and in the top of the base there was a round compass of half a cubit high, and on the top of the base its ledges and its borders are one piece of it. And he graved on the tablets of its ledges, and on its borders cherubim, lions, and palm trees, according to the attachment of each, with wreaths round about. After this manner he made the 10 bases. There was one casting, one measure, and one size to all of them. And he made 10 lavers of brass. Each laver contained 40 measures, and every laver was 4 cubits, and 1 laver upon each of the 10 bases. And he set the bases 5 on the right side of the house, 5 on the left side of the house. And he set the sea on the right side of the house eastward toward the south. Hiram made the lavers and the shovels and the basins, and Hiram finished doing all the work which he did for King Solomon in the house of the Lord. The 2 pillars and the 2 bowls of the chapiters that were on top of the pillars, and 2 networks to cover the 2 bowls of the chapiters which were on the top of the pillars. 400 pomegranates for the 2 networks, 2 rows of pomegranates for each network to cover the 2 bowls of the chapiters that were upon the pillars. The 10 bases and 10 lavers on the bases, and the 1 sea and the 12 oven under the sea, and the pots and the shovels and the basins and all these vessels which Hiram made for King Solomon in the house of the Lord were of bright copper. In the plain of the Jordan did the king cast them, in the thick clay between Succoth and Sarathon, and Solomon left all the vessels unweighed, because there were very, very many. Therefore the weight of the copper was not found out. Solomon made all the vessels of that were in the house of the Lord, the altar of gold, and the table whereupon the showbread was of gold. The candlesticks, 5 on the right side, 5 on the left, before the sanctuary of pure gold, and the flowers and the lamps and the tongs of gold, and the bowls and the musical instruments and the basins and the spoons and the censers of pure gold, and the hinges for the door of the inner house, the most holy place, and of the doors of the house that is of the temple of gold. And all the work that King Solomon had wrought in the house of the Lord was finished. Solomon brought in the things which David his father had dedicated, the silver and the gold and the vessels, put them in the treasuries of the house of the Lord.